What's going on, good people? Just wanted to check in. The end of the week, I want to do a Chauvin Day 5 recap for those of you who've been trying to follow the case or trying to balance your emotional sanity throughout the case. Just wanted to kind of close the week out. We made it to week 5, Day 5, week 1. It's scheduled to go 4 weeks. Usually they schedule or anticipate a larger amount of time that's needed, but who knows, right? These things are always up in the air. So, what did we see today? What did we learn today? And basically, after week 1, where are we at, right? So, today they had 2 witnesses. It was a half a day for the jury, full day for the attorneys and the judge that they argued motions. So, what did we have? We had the first, let me just pull this up. First gentleman who took the stand was basically a sergeant who took over after the other officer in charge that we heard from yesterday. He was a sergeant, previously had worked with community engagement unit, and he worked with the neighborhood watch. And he basically had to take over the scene at about 8:30, 9 o'clock, or it was about 9 o'clock when he got on shift. Went to Cup Foods 38th in Chicago and basically helped secure the scene and figure out what was going on. What did we take away from his testimony? Basically, he began to tell us that he was treating the scene once he began to find out what was going on before he knew George Floyd had passed away. He began to treat it as a critical incident situation, and there's certain protocols. So today we learned a lot about protocol, tons about police protocol, what you're supposed to be doing, what you're not supposed to be doing, when you're supposed to be doing it. So this gentleman, Sergeant Edwards, shows up on the scene, not sure what's going on, hasn't heard the full story, and he rolls up on, I believe it was Lang and King, if I'm not mistaken. And remember, Chauvin's gone at this point, and I believe Tao's gone at this point. And they already had headed down to this room 100, which is in City Hall, which is basically where you're going to go when the stuff's hitting the fans. And so we have now Sergeant Edwards arriving on the scene, finds out that these 2 gentlemen were actually involved in the case, and he was like, okay, full stop. He basically told us the scene had not been secured, that these gentlemen were just walking around. The car that George Floyd's vehicle was still sitting there. Their squad car was still sitting there. They were there. They were supposed to have their cameras running at this point. So he had to tell them, turn your cameras on, had to tell them, secure the scene, had to tell people, we need more backup here. We need to run the police tape. So basically, none of that was going on until Sergeant Edwards arrived. Now, that's the key point, because remember, between the prosecutor and the defense, and especially defense, is going to bring in evidence surrounding what was in Mr. Floyd's car, as if somehow that would have mattered as to why he was killed in the street. But he's likely going to bring in some different things having to do with drugs from the vehicle. Now, what's interesting here is how you going to have these officers who just sat on this man and killed him in full view. They turn their cameras off and the vehicle is there. So there's nobody watching these gentlemen. He said that they were there kind of just like sitting around like, what's up? And he basically was like, okay, something's not right. Secured the scene, basically began to implement protocol. So that's good to know that they were there the whole time, no body cams. So we don't know what they were doing. We don't know what they were placing where. And at this point, they knew that Floyd was dead, whether they wanted to admit it or believe it or not. The 2 gentlemen knew that he didn't have a pulse. And the defense had no cross for Sergeant Edwards. So that was interesting. Then we move on to the guy who's probably getting the most media and attention today that you're going to find. And this gentleman is Richard Zimmerman. He has been a lieutenant in police with the Minneapolis Police Department since 1981. This gentleman has been in some form or capacity as law enforcement. And when I tell you, he brought the fire, okay? He was having none of it. He basically is the #1 in seniority in as far as Minneapolis Police Department, police go. He's the #1 in seniority, meaning that he is the basically oldest or the longest on the force. Now, you can take that how you will. It doesn't mean he's the highest in rank, but he's #1 in seniority. So he basically has been around the block, knows all the things, or likes to believe he knows all the things, and he's being put up to basically testify almost as an expert in kind of police protocol. Basically begins to talk about use of force. What are the lines? What has he been trained on? The lines for law enforcement to operate within when you speak about force. And the big thing that came out of that was basically when he arrived on the scene, he recognized that there had been a homicide. He's a lieutenant over homicide. So when he was called out, at this point, they knew George Floyd was dead and a cop was involved. And he said, a couple of things he said, that one, use of force should always be used relative to the threat level. Then he said in all his years, he was never trained to kneel on the neck of someone in handcuffs backwards, like the way George Floyd would with the face down. He said, nor would he do it because it would likely kill someone. That is damning testimony from the number one guy for the Minneapolis Police Department in a trial against a former Minneapolis police officer. That is huge when you talk about culturally and contextually how far we've come. That's huge to have these people testifying against former officer Chauvin, Mr. Chauvin, Derek, the defendant. So he begins to go down of that once they're cuffed, which we all with common sense know, we don't have to be a police officer. Once they're cuffed, the threat level goes down dramatically. Now, yes, they could karate chop kick you or something, but they're cuffed, they're not really going to hurt you. Once they're cuffed behind their back, you need to get them out of what's called the prone position, which is the position George Floyd was in. And basically he was like, because why? It makes it difficult to breathe. Hello. So basically his bottom line was the use of force that he observed in all of the footage was basically totally unnecessary. So this was extremely damning to come from their own people, right? So basically he's just dropping the bombs on any of what the defense is trying to put out there. The defense got up, of course, crossed him, and we got a glimpse into their strategy. Is basically he was saying, yes, the use of the use of force in comparison with threat level is what we need to think about, but there's all these other things that an officer has to think about. And he began to list and basically go down this list of all the complexities that go into this analysis for the police, right? And it wasn't successful. Anyone who watched it, I'm curious to see if any of y'all thought that was actually productive in any way. It looked desperate to me. It looked like he was trying to clean up a mess that arguably you can't clean up, and you're going to have to figure out another way to do it. But basically, the lieutenant was like, sorry, bruh, there's nothing that you're going to ask me that's going to explain, or explain why, in this particular situation, you can do what you did. And for that long. And so either way, no matter how he began to ask him, he came back to, you wouldn't do it for that long. They should have got off him a long time ago. So that came out today, and that is huge. Some of the takeaways I want to talk about why that's a big deal and why that's huge for this first week, right? There were 3 takeaways for me. 1, your response as an average citizen, person, Facebook person walking by your gas station, our response as a human, as an American, as a human American matters. Why? As we've watched all the footage this week, the outrage, the pressure, the emotional charge that came from that crowd is partially why the response happened the way that it happened, because it was as gruesome as it was. But in this nation, sadly, there have been decades and decades and centuries of torture of Black bodies in many ways, Black, brown bodies, women, right? There was something that came together on this. Not only was it the footage, and we're going to talk about that, but primarily it was also this outrage from this crowd. And watching it again brings us back to that. The other thing that it does, it provides a comparison to Officer Chauvin. Not only does the defendant normally in court, when they sit there coloring on their legal pad, usually they're told, don't show any emotion, don't smile, don't smirk, don't look sad, don't look anything, because anything that you do will be interpreted poorly. So don't do anything. So we expect for a defendant in court to basically have zero humanity. You're just going to sit there and nod and smile and try not to flick somebody off. That's your job, is don't piss off the jury. That's what you're supposed to be doing. So we expect that. What we don't expect is to watch a video while it's all happening and for him to be just as cool as he is sitting there in court today that he was the day of. Despite, now you could say, oh, it's cool, you're supposed to be cool as a cop on da-da-da-da-da. This brother had his hands in his pocket, wasn't hearing nobody, wasn't seeing nothing, and clearly not taking in information. When you think about critical assessment, critical thinking, and the need to adjust fire in circumstances and situations that police officers and professionals need to be able to exhibit in times of emergent circumstances, he showed none of that. As if it didn't even matter. We heard the voice of him after, and it was like it didn't even matter. It didn't even shake him. So the fact that this gentleman can do that up against the outrage from the crowd, and then later the outrage from our culture and in America and in this country, your response matters. Your education matters. Your discussion matters. Whether we believe it or not, it is all energy that we're trying to go in a certain direction. So to me, it's huge. And it also will distinguish people who clearly struggle and should probably not be on the street for many reasons if they're able to do such a thing. So I want us to think about that. Just your response matters. The second thing was the power of the people. So we talk about your response matters and why it's powerful. But to me, like in this case, we have the witnesses who've come forward, who have told the line from the day of, whether it was the outrage in the video to actually taking a stand. So they are doing their thing. The power of the people taking a thing to its final conclusion is huge. There is power in the people. Not only that, in this case, we've had paramedics and now the police. We are going to hear next week from the police chief take the stand against a police officer. That is huge. That potentially could be a tide turning in this nation where we go away from the institution protecting the parts of the institution in which the defendant comes from, to now the institution is going to rid itself of the things and the people that it should. So that is huge to me, the power of the people, the power within the institution. So I say that the cops are now, the police, the institution of the Minneapolis Police Department does not seem to be taking up and in fact speaking directly against Chauvin's actions, from the firing to the civil settlement, which they're going to have to deal with, and now this past week, and then what we're going to hear next week from the police chief. So arguably we have the number one in seniority today and the number one in rank next week, who are going to probably and likely say something very similar. Why was he fired? What's your opinion about the use of force used? So that is huge in this nation contextually when we think about who we are, where we've come from regarding police brutality cases. And in saying that, so protests matter, people matter, crowds matter, your voice matters, you walking down the street matters, your energy matters, right? Because sometimes you have to stand in that gap for somebody else. They are on that stand speaking for George Floyd. Those police officers now are also, it's a huge PR thing to get out who they really want to be as the police, right? We have a crisis in this nation because of the history of the police for a million reasons. And it is huge opportunity in so many ways for the police department to say, where do we want to stand on this and where do we want to come out on this? So I think that's huge, the power of the people. And then finally, when we talk about, we cannot talk about a police brutality case without going back to 1991, March 3rd, Rodney King. That was kind of the first case with video footage, where it was like video footage. Someone had this vintage video footage of this gentleman. What I cannot get over this past week, and we've said this, we all know this if you're living in 2021, the power of the video, the power of the footage, not only from individuals, but we are seeing institutional footage. We are seeing changes that were lobbied and advocated for by social rights activists. The fact that there are body cams, the fact that most of this case has been made up of body cams. Yes, we have the couple witnesses, but we know from the Rodney King case that a witness with a video camera may or may not make it. Why? Because they can build, because an entire case is going to be in context. So the police department can get out of it, support and back the police officer, regardless if they should or they should not, as long as there's nothing to stop them. What's stopping them in this case? The footage. The footage. You cannot take a position adverse to that footage. You can't. Like, you literally cannot. That's where we are. And we're there because people lobbied, because of the power of the people, the power of the protest, the power of the energy to say we need transparency, we need accountability, because we want to be on the same team as the people that protect and serve. What we are seeing is the remnants from the fights and the battles that have been fought since 2013. From Ferguson, when we go back to Michael Brown, a lot of the body cam footage in America began to change right after that point. So think about that. You want to contrast that to 1991 when we think about Rodney King. When we think about that case, there were 21 officers that beat a man on camera for speeding, and they were found not guilty. Fast forward to today, and you can fill in the blank all the way through that. We can fill in the blank with Philando Castile, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, every cop that has been acquitted for murdering a black or brown body in the street in public view, right? So think about that for a second. The power of yourself, the power of your response, and the power of the footage. Because the cops, the police know, with all this body cam, we have seen body cam from almost every single officer involved. And when their body cam is off, it is questioned why, right? So in the past, all this place where there's this body cam footage, there was a gap. So institutions and corrupt police departments, not every police officer, but corrupt police departments would fill in the gap by protecting their own, right? So where there's no footage, you can kind of smudge the lines. He called at this time. I went there at that. I didn't see anything, yada, yada, yada. You can't do that here. There is a log of everything. They have cameras everywhere, right? Think about that. That is because the power of the people have called for accountability, and we haven't let up. So we are not where we want. We haven't transformed every system and circumstance, but I keep thinking about as horrific as that one video of watching Chauvin killing George Floyd. If it was only that video, we would potentially have a Rodney King situation. We have progressed to where so many activists and groups have pushed for accountability at local jurisdictional levels, and it is so important. The street cams, the body cams, the logs, the dispatchers, the fact that the police dispatcher had a camera up where she was working and could literally watch what was happening and call. So those are all checks and balances in our system that have been called for because of what happened to so many people. And what are we learning? What people were saying was true, right? What they were saying was true. So it's forcing the institution, the police officers who really are made and called to protect and serve, who really want to do their job and who really should be out there on the street. It is forcing them into a box of accountability and transparency that I'm thankful for. So they can take that how they want to take it. It's irritating, it's frustrating, but at the end of the day, it protects them and it protects others. Because now we have transparency. Now we have accountability. So even if you thought you were going to try something, you're going to have to do a huge dance and tap dance to get around what is going on. So those are my takeaways from this week, y'all, is we have your response matters. Your energy matters. What you say, who you speak to, when you say it. If you're in public, advocate, protect, speak out for people. Protect yourself, but do what you got to do. The power of the people. We have the police speaking out against the police. This is a huge moment. And finally, we have the footage, which is basically the result of so many people fighting, protesting, speaking out against the way things were and the places we've been, to now bring us to a place where there is so much footage that if the police were to take any position other than the position they are taking, there would be grave penalties. Let's just say that they know that would not be a position you want to take. Why? Because your own evidence would speak against what you're about to do. So what I appreciate now is every police officer, as they should, have to think, watch, and make sure that they are there to truly protect and serve. And Obviously, it doesn't fix everything, but thank God the people that have gotten us to this place and this day. I'm grateful for those people. I'm grateful for the people that have pushed and pushed and pushed when it felt like nothing else could be done. So that's where we're at. That's week one, y'all. Some big things. Hope everybody's doing well on this Good Friday. So I just pray reflection, introspection over all your lives. Hit me up if you have any thoughts, questions. I'm curious to see where people are at and what things they got going on, and what did you take from this week? Because these are just my initial thoughts, and every 10 minutes I got like a different thought and I'm thinking something different. So let me know where you're at. All right, y'all. Happy Easter. Much love.